Noah's moving boxes blocked my doorway when he asked me for one last weekend. He stood behind them with his faded green backpack hanging from one shoulder, rubbing his thumb over a frayed strap, while afternoon light flashed across the brass keys in his other hand. "Lake Mercer," he said. "2 nights. Like we always talked about." I tightened my grip on the doorframe. The painted wood felt cool beneath my palm, but the apartment smelled of cardboard and the cedar cologne Noah had worn since college. In 3 weeks, he would be living several states away. After that, spontaneous dinners would become scheduled calls, and I would have no reason to keep pretending the sound of his key in my lock meant nothing. "You hate sleeping on the ground," I said. "I hate sleeping on rocks. There's a difference." His grin arrived slowly, familiar enough to hurt. Somewhere behind me, the refrigerator hummed, and a car horn sounded on the street below. Noah lifted the keys and let them jingle. "Come on, Ethan. Give me one good memory before I go." I could have refused. I had spent days building sensible excuses, deadlines, bad knees, missing equipment. Instead, I heard myself say, "Pick me up Friday." Noah's shoulders dropped as though he had been holding his breath. He stepped over a box and pulled me into a quick hug. The canvas backpack scraped my arm. His cheek brushed my temple, warm and rough with evening stubble. I kept my hands at his shoulders for exactly 1 second, then pushed him back with a laugh that sounded almost convincing. "You're bringing the tent. You're bringing the camera." My gaze shifted toward the black camera bag beneath my desk. "Maybe." Noah followed my eyes, but I reached down and turned one of his boxes so the shipping label faced the wall. "What time Friday?" I asked. 6. Sunrise Drive." "You've never voluntarily seen 6 in the morning." I'm becoming a new man. In another state, apparently. The joke landed with a dull thud. Noah's smile held, though his fingers stopped moving over the backpack strap. He nodded once and headed into the hall. "Friday, then." I watched him carry the first box toward the elevator. Each step made the packing tape creak beneath his arms. When the steel doors closed, my apartment seemed larger and strangely hollow, filled only by the refrigerator's low vibration and the dry scent of cardboard. I took the camera bag from beneath the desk and set it on the table. Under it lay a small photo album wrapped in brown paper. Noah's name was written across the front in my handwriting. Inside were years of him, laughing over burned pancakes, asleep in the passenger seat, ankle-deep in Pacific surf, looking back at me beneath city lights. I had intended to give it to him before he left. Now I slid it into the bottom of my duffel and covered it with a sweatshirt. The trip would be simple. I would take photographs, make coffee over a fire, listen to Noah complain about mosquitoes, and send him away with one final weekend untouched by the truth. On Friday morning, his headlights washed across my building before dawn. Gravel crackled under his tires, and when I opened the passenger door, warm air carrying the scent of coffee and pine cleaner rolled over me. Noah leaned across the console and smiled. "Ready?" I placed my camera bag at my feet, where he could not see the album hidden beneath it. "Yeah," I said, pulling the door shut. As we drove toward the dark line of the mountains, Noah turned up our old road trip playlist, and I began to wonder whether 3 days beside him would leave my secret intact or make silence impossible. Sunlight spilled over the dashboard as the highway narrowed, flashing between tall pines and turning the windshield gold. Tires hummed against the asphalt while warm air from the vents carried the bitter smell of Noah's coffee through the truck. I rested one boot against my camera bag, keeping it steady whenever the road curved. Noah drummed his fingers against the steering wheel until he glanced down and noticed the white tag hanging from the zipper. "What's that?" Before I could stop him, he caught the tag at a red light and turned it over. The handwritten price faced him. Camera body, 2 lenses, batteries, $1,200. His fingers stopped moving. "You're selling it." "After this weekend." I tucked the tag beneath the strap. "It's been sitting around too much." The light changed, but Noah remained still until a horn sounded behind us. He accelerated hard enough to push me back into the seat. "That camera has crossed 6 states with you, and now it's worth more as rent money." "What about the studio?" The question landed beneath the music. I lowered the volume. For years, I had talked about converting an old storefront into a portrait studio, somewhere with tall windows and walls covered in work that belonged to me. Lately, saying it aloud had begun to feel like describing another person's life. That was never a real plan. Noah pulled onto a gravel overlook so abruptly that stones snapped against the undercarriage. Beyond the windshield, layers of blue mountains dissolved into morning haze. Cold air rushed inside when he opened his door, carrying the sharp scent of wet bark. I followed him out. Noah stood beside the hood, jaw tight, sunlight catching in his wind-blown hair. "You photographed my college graduation after driving 9 hours overnight," he said. "You spent half your savings on that lens because you said it made ordinary people look honest. Don't tell me this was never real. People change." "No. People get scared and rename it practicality." The words came out louder than the wind. I stared at him. Noah had mocked my terrible business names, helped me paint sample walls, and once spent an entire Sunday building a website I never published. But he had never fought me over my own choices. "Why does this matter so much to you?" I asked. His hand flattened against the cold metal hood. For a moment, only pine branches scraped together above us. "Because I know what your face looks like when you're holding that camera," he said. "And because I'm apparently the only one angry enough to stop you from erasing that version of yourself." My throat tightened. "You're leaving, Noah. You don't get to decide what I keep." The color drained from his knuckles. He looked toward the mountains, then back at the bag inside the truck. Instead of answering, he crossed to the passenger side, lifted it from the floor, and locked it in the metal storage compartment behind the seat. The latch slammed with a hard click. "Give me the key." Noah slipped it into his pocket. "You'll get it when we come back from Lake Mercer. That's not your decision. Then spend the weekend convincing me you truly want to quit." He stepped close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath beneath the clean bite of pine. His voice dropped. "Look me in the eye on Sunday and say the dream means nothing to you. If you can do that, I'll hand you the key." Then he returned to the driver's seat, leaving me beside the truck with the wind pressing cold through my jacket and a new question following us toward the forest. Why did losing my future seem to hurt Noah, as if it belonged to him too? Lake Mercer appeared through the pines like a sheet of hammered silver, its surface flashing beneath the late afternoon sun while wind rattled the needles overhead. By the time we carried our gear down the rocky shoreline, the air smelled of cold water, damp earth, and wood smoke drifting from some distant campsite. I chose a level patch near the lake and unrolled the tent before Noah could reopen the argument about my camera. "Corner first," I said, pressing a stake into the soil with my boot. "I remember." Noah lifted the bundled poles. "You're the one who assembled it backward last time." That was artistic interpretation. His laugh loosened something in my chest. For 10 minutes, we became ourselves again, trading insults, untangling nylon cords, bumping shoulders as we worked beneath the amber light. Then one aluminum pole jammed inside its sleeve. "Hold the fabric," I told him. Noah braced it while I twisted harder. The pole snapped into place, and a sharp edge dragged across my palm. I jerked back. A bright line opened beneath my thumb, red against the dust on my skin. "Ethan, it's nothing." I curled my fingers and reached for the next stake. Noah caught my wrist. Unlike the overlook, there was no anger in the gesture. His grip was careful, his thumb resting against my pulse. "Sit down." "You don't have to sit." This time I obeyed. He guided me onto a fallen log and pulled the first aid kit from his pack. The lake whispered against the stones behind us as he knelt between my boots, close enough that his knee touched mine. Antiseptic stung cold across the cut. I hissed. Noah immediately cupped the back of my hand, steadying it between both of his. "Sorry," he murmured. His breath warmed my knuckles. I had seen those hands repair a sink, change a tire in sleet, and drag me onto a dance floor at his sister's wedding. They had touched me 1,000 careless ways. Nothing about this felt careless. Noah wrapped the bandage around my palm, each turn slow and precise. When he finished, he did not let go. Sunlight moved through the branches and caught in his eyes. His thumb traced once along the edge of the gauze, then stopped as if he had only just noticed what he was doing. "You always pretend it doesn't hurt," he said. "Only when you're watching." The answer escaped before I could soften it. His gaze lifted to mine. The breeze cooled the damp hair at my temples, but heat gathered beneath my collar. Somewhere across the lake, a bird called once, and the silence afterward seemed enormous. Noah's fingers tightened around mine. I could have pulled away. Instead, I turned my hand carefully inside his until our palms met around the bandage. His lips parted. For one suspended second, neither of us looked surprised enough. Then the tent fabric snapped loudly in the wind. Noah released me and stood, nearly knocking the first aid kit into the dirt. We should finish before dark. Yeah. My voice came out rough. We raised the tent without touching again. Every time he passed me a pole, he held it by the far end. Every time I looked up, his attention shifted toward the lake. By sunset, the shelter stood between the trees, small and unmistakably meant for two. Noah opened the entrance and glanced from the single sleeping space to my bandaged hand. "Tell me that meant nothing," he said quietly. The wind pressed the nylon wall inward, then released it with a long, unsteady breath. I could not give him the lie he was asking for. The fire cracked between us, sending sparks into the darkening pines while smoke carried the sharp scent of cedar across the campsite. Across the flames, Noah waited for the lie I still could not give him. I reached for another branch instead, feeding it into the orange coals until the bark hissed. "We should eat before it gets cold." The muscles along his jaw tightened. "That's your answer?" I opened 2 cans of chili and set them near the fire. Metal scraped against stone, unnaturally loud beneath the whisper of the lake. "I don't have one. You had one when you held my hand." "Noah, forget it." He stood so quickly that his folding chair sank backward into the pine needles. By the time the chili was warm, Noah had disappeared into the tent. I ate alone beneath a sky crowded with stars, listening to his movements through the nylon. A zipper dragged shut, a sleeping bag shaken open, then nothing. The silence felt unfamiliar. In 12 years, we had survived bad dates, failed jobs, family holidays, and a roadside breakdown outside Boise. We had never stopped speaking while sharing the same 10 feet of ground. When the fire collapsed into red embers, I carried my sleeping bag past the tent and tied the spare hammock between 2 pines. The webbing felt rough beneath my bandaged palm. Cold air seeped through my sweatshirt as I tested the knots one-handed. Behind me, the tent unzipped. "What are you doing?" Noah stood barefoot in the entrance, lit from behind by the yellow lantern. "Sleeping out here. It's supposed to drop below 45. I have the insulated bag." "That isn't what I asked." A breeze lifted the lake's damp mineral smell and stirred the tent flap against his shoulder. I fastened the last strap and avoided his eyes. "There's more room for you this way." Noah stepped onto the pine needles. "More room?" After what happened, I thought some distance might help. "Help who?" The hammock swayed under my hand. "Both of us." A short sound left him, too empty to be laughter. "Of course. What does that mean?" "It means I spent weeks packing my life into boxes, wondering whether leaving would matter to you." He folded his arms against the cold. "Then tonight, for 1 second, I thought maybe it did." "It does. You have a strange way of showing it." His gaze moved from the hammock to the tent and finally settled on me. "You look relieved, Ethan." "I'm not. You couldn't say the moment meant nothing, but you can't stand to sleep 6 feet away from me either. Because if I stay in there, I might do something we can't take back." The words landed between us. Noah's shoulders shifted, but he did not step closer. "And losing me is something you can take back?" My mouth opened. Nothing came. He nodded once, as if my silence had confirmed a fact he had been resisting. Then he went inside and pulled the zipper closed. The lantern clicked off. Darkness swallowed the tent, leaving only the fading embers and the silver edge of the lake. I climbed into the hammock, where every movement made the ropes creak. The cold pressed through the fabric beneath my back, and my injured palm pulsed against my chest. 10 feet away, Noah remained perfectly still. No teasing came through the nylon. No whispered complaint about my snoring. For the first time since we were 19, we were close enough to hear each other breathe and had nothing left we could safely say. Near midnight, the tent zipper opened. Noah's silhouette appeared against the moonlit water, fully dressed, his shoes in one hand. "Tomorrow," he said without looking at me. "I need you to hear why I really brought you here." Then he walked toward the lake, and the darkness closed behind him. Rain arrived before dawn, drumming against the nylon tent and shaking cold drops from the pine branches overhead. Water seeped through the hammock fabric beneath my shoulders, and the air smelled of wet bark, mud, and last night's dead fire. I lowered my feet into the soaked ground just as the tent zipper tore open. Noah stepped out, grabbed my duffel from beside the fire ring, and threw it beneath the rainfly. "Inside," he said. "We're not waiting until morning." A white flash split the sky beyond Lake Mercer. Thunder rolled across the water hard enough to rattle the cooking pans, and I followed him into the tent because the storm had made distance impossible. The cramped space held the damp heat of two bodies, the sharp scent of rain, and the soft amber glow of the lantern Noah switched on. He knelt opposite me, hair dripping onto his gray shirt, then reached into his jacket and placed his phone between us. An email filled the screen. I caught the company logo, a subject line thanking him for his interest, and a date from 3 weeks earlier. They rejected me, Noah said. There is no new job. Rain hammered the roof until the words seemed to vibrate beneath it. I looked from the email to his face. You said you accepted an offer. I lied. He wiped water from his mouth with the back of his wrist. The boxes are empty, Ethan. Most of them, anyway. I packed enough to make it look real. My injured hand tightened around the edge of my sleeping bag, pulling the slick fabric into my fist. You let me believe you were leaving. Because asking you to stay for coffee never told me anything. Neither did birthdays, road trips, or every Sunday we wasted on your couch. His voice sharpened, not louder, but stripped of every familiar joke. You always made room for me. You never gave me a reason. Another gust bowed the tent wall inward. Noah caught the nearest support pole and held it steady while I crawled across the floor, retied the loosened corner, and drove the stake deeper into the mud with the heel of my boot. When I returned, water ran from my sleeves onto the tarp between us. Nothing outside had grown quieter, but the space inside felt brutally clear. So this whole weekend was a test? I asked. Noah unlocked his phone again, opened the draft resignation letter he had never sent, and deleted it. Then he pulled his apartment key from his pocket and set it beside the phone. No, it was the only choice I had left that might force us to stop pretending. You could have asked whether I wanted you here. I did, in every way except those exact words. His fingers curled against his knees. And last night you chose a freezing hammock over being near me. I glanced at the key. The metal flashed each time lightning whitened the tent. What did you want me to do? Noah leaned forward, close enough that I could hear his uneven breathing beneath the rain. Meet me where I could see it. The answer landed harder than the thunder. He had risked the one thing we had always treated as permanent, not for a promotion, not for a different life, but to discover whether his absence could break through my silence. Noah pushed the key across the tarp until it touched my knee. I'm not moving, he said, but I'm not going back to what we were, either. His eyes held mine without retreat. So when this storm passes, tell me whether you want me to stay, and this time, don't answer like my best friend. Water gathered along the tent seam and dropped onto the tarp with the steady click of a clock. Beyond the nylon walls, thunder had weakened to a distant growl, but the air remained cold and damp, heavy with wet pine and churned earth. I closed my fingers around Noah's apartment key, its jagged edge pressed into my bandaged palm until pain sharpened everything I had spent years refusing to name. I love you. The words came out quietly, yet Noah went completely still. Even the shallow movement of his breathing seemed to stop. I set the key between us rather than keeping it. Not because you might leave. Not because you forced me to answer. I've loved you through every bad haircut, every midnight grocery run, every morning you showed up with coffee and pretended you happened to be nearby. Lightning dimmed to a pale flicker behind him. Noah's eyes stayed fixed on mine, bright in the gray light filtering through the tent. How long? Long enough that the idea of asking you to stay felt selfish. My throat tightened around the next breath. Long enough that I decided losing your proximity would hurt less than losing you completely. Noah reached for me, but I pulled my injured hand back before his fingers could close around it. The motion cut deeper than the tent pole had. His arm remained suspended between us. Don't do that, he said. Don't finally tell me, and then disappear behind another careful sentence. I'm not hiding. I unzipped my duffel and removed the wrapped photo album. The paper had softened at the corners from the damp, though the dark green ribbon remained tied. I placed it beside his key. That was supposed to be your goodbye present. I couldn't hand it to you because every page says what I couldn't. Noah looked down, but I covered the album with my palm before he could open it. Not yet. If you look now, while I'm sitting here waiting for an answer, it becomes evidence. Leverage. I won't use our history to corner you. You think this is freedom? His voice cracked against the soft hiss of rain. You confess, put years of us on the floor, and decide what I'm allowed to feel. No, I'm deciding what I'm willing to cost you. I folded his key into his hand and closed his fingers around it. The metal clicked against his ring. You lied because I wouldn't speak. I won't answer that lie by making you responsible for my feelings. The storm had thinned to a cold drizzle when I reached for my jacket. Noah caught the sleeve, not my wrist, and the restraint in that small choice nearly stopped me. Where are you going? To the ranger shelter near the trail junction. It's less than half a mile. I pulled on my boots, their wet laces gritty with mud. You asked whether I wanted you to stay. I do. More than I've wanted anything. But you get to decide what staying means when I'm not here watching you choose. His grip loosened. I left the camera bag where Noah had secured it and pushed through the tent flap into air that smelled of cedar and rainwater. Cold droplets struck my face as I crossed the dark campsite. Behind me, the zipper rasped shut, leaving Noah with the key, the album, and the truth I could no longer take back. By the time the lake appeared through the trees like tarnished silver, I understood what my silence had finally cost. There might be no friendship waiting when I returned. Only Noah's choice about whether we could become something else. Rain ticked against the tent fly in a thinning rhythm, each drop shaking silver beads from the nylon, while dawn pressed a faint gray glow through the seams. Inside, the air smelled of wet cedar, mud, and the coffee neither of us had made. Noah sat alone with my apartment key, imprint still warm in his palm, and the wrapped album resting between his knees. He could have left it closed. I had asked him to choose without the weight of our history, but the history was already there. In the spare key I had returned, in the camera bag he had refused to let me sell, in every empty inch of the tent after I walked away. The paper tore beneath his thumb with a dry whisper. Underneath lay a charcoal gray cover, softened at the corners from years of handling. Noah opened it. The first photograph showed him at 20, asleep in a library chair with a textbook balanced on his chest and winter sunlight across his face. Beneath it, in my handwriting, were 6 words. The day a stranger felt familiar. He turned the page. Noah laughing through a mouthful of birthday cake. Noah waist deep in the Pacific, daring me to follow. Noah holding the dented saucepan from our first apartment after the smoke alarm had driven us onto the sidewalk. There were crowded rooms, long highways, cheap diners, graduation gowns, moving boxes, and Sunday mornings. But no matter where I had aimed the lens, Noah occupied the center. Even when he appeared only as a reflection in a cafe window or a blurred figure at the end of a trail, the photograph leaned toward him. The rain softened to a hiss in the pines. Noah's breathing did not. Halfway through the album, a picture slipped free and landed face down on the sleeping bag. He picked it up and found himself standing at this same lake 3 summers earlier, his hair bright with water, one hand extended toward the camera. On the back, I had written, I keep pretending I photograph places. Really, I photograph every place Noah makes worth remembering. His thumb dragged across the ink until it smudged against his skin. Then he began turning pages faster, no longer searching for proof of what I felt, but confronting what he had done with it. In photograph after photograph, his own gaze betrayed him. It followed me beyond the frame. It softened when I stood close. It held on during moments he must have assumed the camera could not catch. The false relocation, the hollow boxes, the unanswered hints. None of them had been tests of whether I valued our friendship. They had been shelters built around a simpler truth he had refused to name. Noah closed the album, then immediately opened it again to the final page. Beneath a photograph of 2 empty camp chairs facing Lake Mercer, I had left a blank space and one unfinished caption. Wherever you go next, a sharp breath broke from him. Idiot, he whispered, though the word cracked in the middle. He slid the apartment key into his pocket, wrapped the album in his rain jacket, and pulled on his boots without bothering to lace them properly. By the time he stepped outside, the storm had washed the campsite pale and raw. Cold water soaked through his socks as he crossed the mud to the trail marker, but he did not turn toward the car. He turned toward the ranger shelter, and toward the answer he had spent years forcing me to give first. The question was no longer whether he needed me to stay. It was whether he could reach me before I mistook his silence for goodbye. The ranger shelter's warped doors shuddered in the wet wind, carrying the smell of soaked pine and cold earth through the narrow room. I looked up from the wooden bench as Noah appeared in the doorway, mud streaking his jeans, my wrapped album pinned beneath one arm. Wherever we go next, he said, breathless. That's how you finish it. Before I could answer, He crossed the rough plank floor and pressed the apartment key into my palm. I'm staying, Ethan. Not because you asked me to. Because I'm done pretending I want a future that doesn't have you in it. The key's metal edges bit into my skin. Behind him, the clouds were thinning over Lake Mercer, turning the water the color of dull steel. I closed my fingers around the key. Then we don't pretend anymore. We returned to the campsite without touching, but the distance between us no longer felt like an escape. It felt charged, waiting. Noah packed the album inside his waterproof bag while I collapsed the soaked hammock. When I reached for my camera case, he handed it over without argument. Sunday came early, he said. Convince me. I unzipped the bag. The familiar leather strap was cool and damp beneath my thumb. The dream doesn't mean nothing. My voice scraped against the hush after the storm. I was selling it because every picture I wanted to take reminded me of a life I thought I couldn't have. Noah held my gaze. I pulled off the price tag, tore it in half, and tucked the camera against my chest. I'm keeping it. Gravel shifted under our boots as we carried the last gear toward the parking area. 50 yards from the car, the trail vanished. The storm had sheared away a broad section of the access road, leaving a raw slope of reddish mud, broken roots, and water rushing through the trench below. Our car sat untouched on the far side, close enough to see beads of rain on its windshield and impossible to reach safely. A bent trail sign pointed uphill toward an old maintenance path. Noah tested the ground with a fallen branch while I unfolded the damp park map beneath the shelter of my jacket. The longer route curled nearly 4 miles around the ridge. If the creek rose too, we could lose daylight, I said. Then we move now. Noah redistributed the gear, taking the tent while I carried the camera, album, and food. At the steepest section, he anchored a rope around a pine and crossed first. Beyond it, I found the faded blue blazes and guided him away from a washed-out switchback. Neither of us played rescuer. We traded the lead whenever the mountain demanded it. By noon, weak sunlight steamed from our jackets, filling the air with the scent of nylon and pine sap. At a ridge clearing, Noah took out his phone. One bar flickered across the screen. I had another interview scheduled, he said. Different company. Same state as the job I lied about. He called before I could respond. His voice remained steady as he canceled the interview and withdrew his application. When the call ended, the wind moved through the firs with a low, ocean-like roar. That wasn't for me, I said. I know. It was for me. I raised the camera, framed him against the opening clouds, and pressed the shutter. The click sounded small, but final. By late afternoon, we reached the car from the northern trailhead, exhausted, mud-caked, and carrying futures neither of us had discarded. Noah placed the album on the dashboard, then looked toward the darkening lake below. Before we drive home, he said, come back to the shore with me at sunrise. This time, he reached for my hand and waited. I laced my fingers through his. Tell me why. His thumb moved once across my knuckles. Because staying is settled. Tomorrow, we decide what staying together means. Cold blue light spread across Lake Mercer, turning the water smooth as hammered silver while mist threaded between the firs. The air smelled of wet bark and stone, and somewhere along the shore, a bird tested the morning with one clear note. I found Noah beside the place where our tent had stood, his jacket zipped to his throat and the photo album tucked beneath one arm. 2 dented metal cups steamed on a nearby rock. You came, he said. You asked. I stopped close enough to see dampness caught in his hair. Noah handed me 1 cup. The coffee was bitter and hot, warming my fingers as the wind crossed the lake. Yesterday, I kept asking whether you wanted me to stay, he said. That was the wrong question. He set his cup down, then took the album from beneath his arm. The new caption he had written beneath the unfinished photograph waited inside. Home was never the apartment. It was the person I kept returning to. His thumb rested against the page before he closed it. I canceled the interview because I chose my life here. I gave you the key because I want you in that life. But I don't want another undefined promise where we hide behind being best friends whenever this gets frightening. The old reflex rose in me. The joke that could soften the moment. The careful sentence that could preserve an exit. Instead, I placed my coffee beside his and stepped forward. Then Noah exits. Noah searched my face. Morning light caught in his eyes, pale and unguarded. Tell me what you want, Ethan. You. Not because you nearly left. Not because I'm afraid of being alone. I want ordinary Tuesdays, arguments over groceries, your shoes blocking my hallway, and enough years to fill 10 more albums. His breath left in a small cloud. That sounds inconvenient. You've always been inconvenient. His laugh broke softly over the water, and then his hand curved around the back of my neck. He paused there, giving me every chance to move away. I closed the remaining inch. Noah kissed me slowly, without urgency or uncertainty, while the sun broke over the ridge and laid a path of gold across the lake. When we parted, his forehead stayed against mine. "Come back here with me every year," he said. "Same shore. Preferably better weather. As friends." His fingers tightened lightly at my neck. Never only that again. I kissed him once more in answer. Months later, autumn had turned the Mercer woods copper and red when we carried one tent down to the shore. Noah wore my apartment key beside his own, and my camera hung against my chest, its edges marked from regular use. Between us sat a new album filled with paid photography assignments, crooked kitchen shelves, shared breakfasts, and the lease we had signed for a place with enough light for a studio. We raised the tent together, bumping shoulders without retreating. At dusk, Noah opened the album to an empty final page while wood smoke drifted from our fire and dry leaves whispered across the ground. "What goes here?" he asked. I set the camera on a rock, started the timer, and pulled him into the frame as the lake reflected the first stars. "Whatever we build next." The shutter clicked as Noah kissed my temple, capturing the moment our last trip as best friends became the first photograph of our life together.